Hi, it's Sandra here from Creating Spain, and today I want to do a little video on watercolour backgrounds. Now, you don't have to have artistic ability to do watercolour backgrounds, and especially with the ranges of water brushes and water pens that are around at the moment, you don't have to have masses of equipment either. You can get water brushes such as ones like this. If I can remove the top, it's quite stiff, that produce perfectly fine watercolour, or you can use a cheap palette, whatever. Choice is yours, but there are most likely, I don't know, a couple of thousand different choices for watercolours these days. Anyway, what I wanted to do was to give you a couple of little hints and tips that might make your watercolouring a little more successful. I have several examples here. The first one here I've just put onto a piece of card, and as you can see, at least I hope you can see, it's slightly warped, and this is on purpose, believe it or not, because I wanted to show you an example. Now, the thing with watercolour is that it does take a reasonable amount of water soaking into paper, and this is watercolour paper, to work, which is all very well and good, except for the fact that water does one thing to paper which you cannot stop it doing completely, and that's warping. So this one I allowed to dry for an hour or two before mounting, and you can tell that it must have still been slightly damp because it has warped the card. Now, there's a way around this apart from letting it dry until it's completely dry. Even then, sometimes you'll find that watercolour will actually be warped. But what you can do, if you have an embossing machine, is run it between smooth plates to flatten it. It acts like an iron basically, and it'll flatten it out. Don't do it when it's damp, leave it until it's completely dry to do it. And you should find that even if your watercolour was pretty badly warped to start with, after doing that, it'll be fine to use. Okay, now you can see from this example it's relatively soft in colour, and the reason it is soft in colour is because I used the wet on wet painting technique. So I made the watercolour paper nice and wet and then applied my paint to that, and the paint will spread out because that's what watercolour does. The other thing that you can see on this is I have some vaguely white lines, and the reason I wanted to show you this, I don't know if I can actually get a clear enough picture of this, the reason I wanted to show you this is the difference between a cheap and cheerful masking tape, which doesn't do the job really well, i.e. what I used on this, and something which is better, i.e. this one, which is a lot dearer but actually functions properly as a masking tape. The difference is, for example, between what I've just shown you and the fact that there, although yes, I've used a gold pen over it, I have clean lines. Okay, this stuff doesn't allow paint to seep underneath it, unless you do as I did there and you didn't actually put it down quite hard enough in the first place. But it does produce a much cleaner result. Now, what I've done on this particular sample is I have used watercolour pencils, and I just scribbled on the paper, and then I used one of the water brushes to go over the top and just wet it and let the paint colours blend. I then went in with one of these permanent gold markers, which has a very fine point, and I defined the edges of the colours. And this can give you some interesting results. Here is another one that I did, and this was done wet on wet with normal watercolour paint, but wet on wet technique. And as you can see, the edges are quite soft. And all I've done is I've gone over different areas of the colour with wiggly lines to depict the edges. Now, this isn't exact. I haven't gone over it thinking, oh, I must match this line exactly. It's just a rough approximation, just to give a fun effect. This one is done with the wet on wet again, as you can see, soft edges and things. In this particular instance, I put little blobs of masking fluid on to provide some white dots. Now I've got my masking fluid in this bottle here with a very, very fine tip. The bottle comes from a vape store, yeah, of all places, but it's quite good for applying a normal masking fluid quite accurately. And it has its little rubber top, which will stop it from drying out. So that's how I got the little dots that you can see, just about, to be white. On this one here, I have not used the wet on wet technique, and you can see the vibrancy and the strength of the colour and the hard edges. And that is because the paint is wet, the paper is dry. It's as simple as that. The white squiggles are the masking fluid that I applied just by hand with this little bottle in random movements. Now when you're using masking fluid, if you've not used masking fluid before, it's important that you apply it to dry paper and you wait until your masking fluid and your paint is dry before you rub it off, okay? Make sure it is thoroughly dry. You can't leave it on for days on end, but you can certainly leave it overnight if you need to do that. Okay, so that's the little bit that I wanted to tell you about on watercolouring. Give it a go, it's good fun, and you can get some really interesting backgrounds just playing around. Just let your mind relax, get a brush, get some paint, and get colouring. Take care, bye-bye.